criticised, firstly because he became drunk in public.
The whole description she does of the Portland hospital, the birth, that was completely fabricated. We all know.
Harry and Meghan Markle's surrogacy scandal has entered the mainstream media domain.
Tom, do you think Harry and Meghan are fast learning what they signed away when they took this Netflix big moolah? And I would say they signed away their credibility and their dignity.
Well, that's our view, but it's not theirs. They need the money, and they need it now more than ever because they've got no other source of income. So I think they're just stuck with the devil now. They're tied to Netflix, they're tied to their book, and all the criticism they're going to take means nothing because that's the only way they can earn their money.
But if she hasn't had the children herself or Harry hadn't been involved, then they can't be in the royal line. They have to have royal blood, those little ones. Without that, there's no chance of them becoming a member of the royal family.
As the conversation keeps growing online, one thing is clear. Speculation thrives in silence. And right now, silence is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Supporters of Harry and Meghan argue that protecting their children's privacy was always the goal. They stepped away from royal life to build boundaries. They chose California. They chose distance. They chose control over what gets shared and what doesn't. In that light, limited public access isn't suspicious. It's intentional. But critics see it differently. They say when you remain publicly connected to the monarchy, when titles remain, when succession placement exists, when global interviews discuss legacy, transparency naturally becomes part of the equation. Not because strangers are entitled to personal details, but because the monarchy itself is rooted in documentation, protocol, and continuity. And that's where the tension lives. It's not proof. It's not evidence. It's not confirmed wrongdoing. It's perception. And perception in the royal sphere can be just as powerful as fact.
What we're now seeing is that both of them, having posed as the victim for so long, are really the aggressors.
Had you hoped your children, Archie and Lilibet, would have had that you think they won't be able to now with this decision?
Well, for a start, the only time that I've come back to the UK is sadly for funerals or court cases.
In this case, about whether you think the...
Tom Bower's commentary didn't introduce new documentation. What it did was amplify existing doubts that have circulated in corners of the internet for years. When a known royal biographer speaks, even without presenting hard evidence, it adds fuel to discussions that were already simmering. That doesn't make the claims true, but it does make the conversation louder. Meanwhile, Buckingham Palace has maintained its usual approach. No public engagement with speculation. No emotional rebuttals, no direct denials. Just the same institutional stillness it has used for generations. Historically, the monarchy operates under one core rule: never legitimize rumor by responding to it unless absolutely necessary. So far, that line hasn't been crossed. In Montecito, the strategy appears similar. Legal teams stay active, public statements stay minimal, social media remains polished and selective. The message is clear: we are not engaging. But here's the paradox. In today's digital culture, refusal to engage can sometimes be interpreted as confirmation. And that's not necessarily fair, but it is reality. Every old clip gets replayed. Every timeline gets scrutinized. Every public appearance is slowed down and analyzed frame by frame. In an era where information moves instantly and narratives form overnight, ambiguity becomes fertile ground for theories. And once theories gain momentum, they are nearly impossible to reverse. For Harry, this moment carries a different weight. His identity has always been tied to heritage, to bloodline, to legacy. The idea that his children's place in that legacy is even being debated publicly strikes at something deeply personal. For Meghan, the stakes are brand level. Much of her public image post-royal life centers around motherhood, independence, and dignity under pressure.
She's money obsessed and always has been. And that is why she married Prince Harry. A great surprise and disappointment was to discover that Prince Harry had very little money. She imagined he'd be worth hundreds of millions, if not billions. And she's having to make up for it now.
I can't see a world in which I would be bringing my wife and children back to the UK at this point. And the things that they're going to miss is, well, everything. You know, I love my country. I always have done, despite what some people in that country have done. So, you know, I miss the UK. I miss parts of the UK. Of course I do.
Conversation, I'm told and I believe, It was very early on in their relationship when Harry is bowled over by Meghan, is desperately in love, and already is talking about marriage. But long before their engagement is even announced, let alone they're married and she's pregnant. And he's sitting in Clarence's house with then Prince Charles and Camilla. And Camilla just laughingly says, well, any child you'll have will probably have brown skin and ginger hair.
The Queen and the Duke.
Yes, and we just bumped into the Duke as we were walking by, which was so nice. So it'll be a nice moment to introduce the baby to more family, and my mom's with us as well. So it's been a really, here we go.
Another ongoing speculation, even if unproven, creates instability around that image. But here's the important part. Speculation is not confirmation. Questions are not proof. Internet analysis is not official investigation. Right now, what exists is conversation. Intense, emotional, divided conversation. There is no formal statement suggesting any change in the children's status. There is no official move from the palace indicating constitutional disruption. What we are witnessing is the collision between privacy and public curiosity. And that collision is messy. The monarchy depends on structure. The Sussexes depend on narrative control. When those two worlds separate but remain symbolically connected, friction is inevitable. So where does this go next? Either clarity eventually comes, in some form, or the silence continues and the internet keeps filling in the blanks. Historically, royal storms burn hot and then fade when new headlines emerge. But this one feels different to many observers because it touches on lineage, identity, and legacy, subjects that are deeply emotional for both supporters and critics. At the end of the day, there is a line that should not be crossed. Speculation about children should never turn into harassment or harm. Debate around institutions is one thing. Targeting minors is another. The real question isn't whether the internet will keep talking. It's whether official clarity will ever be offered, or whether this will remain one of those modern, royal mysteries fueled more by perception than by proof. To be clear, silence from the palace does not equal confirmation of anything. Historically, the royal institution avoids engaging with speculation unless it directly affects constitutional matters. Their strategy has always been restraint. No emotional reactions. No public sparring. No validation of rumor cycles. But in the digital era, that old strategy doesn't always land the way it used to. When no one responds, the internet fills the vacuum. Tom Bower's reputation is part of why this discussion refuses to fade. He has built a career on controversial biographies and hard-hitting commentary. Supporters see him as fearless. Critics see him as provocative. But either way, when he speaks, media ecosystems react. That reaction alone can amplify doubt, even when nothing official has changed. What's happening now feels less like a factual shift and more like a perception shift.
I think Tina is a great journalist, and perhaps she has inside information. I don't see how the Sussexes can give up both the Netflix and the book deal. They won't be living in a Montecito cottage. Be more likely living somewhere in downtown LA in a little hovel. That's their problem. They're stuck now. But, the truth is about them. Then he wore a Nazi uniform at a party. Then he was wearing absolutely nothing in the nude at the party in Las Vegas. And he couldn't cope with the criticism because, in his view, he is a target. And it didn't help that his telephones were hacked by News International Rupert Murdoch.
And perception in the royal sphere is powerful currency. The Sussex brand has always leaned into narrative control. Carefully curated appearances, selective interviews, limited imagery, strong messaging around privacy and protection. That approach worked for a time. It created mystery. It created boundaries. But mystery, when mixed with royal titles, can also create suspicion. There's an important distinction here. Asking questions is not the same as proving wrongdoing. Public curiosity is not evidence. Social media analysis is not verification. Yet once a narrative of something feels off gains traction, it becomes extremely difficult to reverse. From a communications perspective, this is where things get delicate. Respond too aggressively and it looks defensive. Ignore it entirely and it appears evasive. Clarify partially and it invites deeper scrutiny. It's a lose-lose terrain. For Harry especially, this moment touches something deeply personal. His public story has centered on breaking cycles, protecting his family and building a safer environment for his children than the one he experienced growing up. When commentary begins to question anything connected to that narrative, It doesn't just challenge reputation, it challenges purpose. And purpose is harder to defend than image. Meanwhile, Meghan's strategy, at least publicly, remains controlled and contained. No emotional rebuttals, no dramatic interviews addressing the controversy head-on, just structured messaging and legal safeguards. That doesn't necessarily signal guilt or concealment. For public figures, especially those with young children, minimizing exposure is often the safest route. But perception rarely waits for nuance. The longer the speculation lingers, the more it morphs. What began as commentary from one biographer has evolved into trending topics, video breakdowns, podcast debates, and viral threads analyzing everything from public timelines to press releases.
To go to the Portland hospital, she intended to have the baby at home. We know that they deceived the public about the birth data and time of the whole event. So, and also, you know, even it goes down to the lawyer. The lawyer saying that in that statement, when they had that long attack on the Mail, which is astonishing, that Meghan, we know she lied.
And once mainstream panels begin discussing something, even hypothetically, it gains legitimacy in the public mind. This is where the palace's distance becomes part of the story itself. There are no visible reconciliation moments, no widely shared family images, no symbolic gestures. And in royal history, symbolism matters. But context matters too. Harry and Meghan chose geographical and institutional separation. With that separation naturally comes reduced public overlap. The absence of visible connection does not automatically equal conflict or secrecy. It can simply reflect boundaries. Still, perception isn't shaped by logic alone. It's shaped by contrast. And when people compare public images of other royal children with the relative privacy of Archie and Lilibet, they interpret what they see through their own assumptions. At this stage, what exists is tension. Between privacy and public expectation, between modern celebrity culture and centuries-old royal tradition. The bigger question isn't whether the internet will keep speculating. It will. The real question is whether any form of official clarity ever becomes necessary, or whether this storm eventually burns itself out like so many before it. For now, no constitutional change has been announced. No formal status alteration has been declared. No verified documentation has been released suggesting disruption. What we are watching is narrative pressure building in real time. And narrative pressure, in the age of viral media, can feel just as intense as confirmed scandal. This story isn't about proven facts shifting. It's about perception accelerating faster than institutions are willing to respond.
Don't want to be written about, on the whole, whose lives are shrouded in mystery, and they want to hide their secrets. And I just love digging away to find out what they don't want us to know. I wrote 4 years ago a book about Prince Charles, and it was a story about how he had rehabilitated himself after Diana's death, and how Camilla also had to be rehabilitated. And it was a #1. It was a fascinating story. So when Meghan came along into the scene, I just thought, this is fascinating. How is this going to play out? To tell the truth, I spoke to very few friends of Meghan because she put a fatwa on anyone talking to me who she could. So I sent off dozens and dozens of emails to her friends, and most of them didn't even reply. And obviously I spoke to her father, who loves her still very much, and said, you know, in the end, whatever she is, she's still my daughter. You can't beat the real story. I mean, that's the excitement of writing these sort of books, that in the end, nothing beats the truth, the real fact.
And that gap between speed and silence is where the chaos lives. A theory gaining traction suggests this distance isn't punishment at all, but protection. Some royal commentators believe the monarchy may have created space deliberately, not to isolate Harry and Meghan, but to insulate the institution from any controversy that could spiral beyond control. If that interpretation is correct, the palace may simply be waiting, watching, allowing Harry and Meghan the opportunity to clarify matters themselves rather than stepping in publicly and escalating the situation. At that point, the conversation shifts. It stops being internet chatter and becomes something more serious, at least in perception. If doubts are being discussed at mainstream levels, the narrative moves from speculation into institutional optics. And optics matter deeply within a constitutional monarchy. This has moved beyond niche commentary. Veteran journalists, longtime royal analysts, and even neutral observers are now asking the same cautious question. Will Harry and Meghan ever directly address the growing confusion?
Well, look, Radar Online, in fairness, they do quote you and say Royal Author Lady Colin Campbell recently challenged the conspiracy of silence and misinformation surrounding both.
The fact that such a question is circulating at all shows how much the narrative has expanded. What makes the situation feel heavier to critics is the belief that clearer communication earlier on might have reduced speculation. In today's media environment, ambiguity rarely stays quiet. It multiplies. When official responses consist primarily of silence or legal positioning, audiences often interpret that through their own lens. For Harry, this moment feels especially complicated. He once represented the rebellious but relatable prince, the one who broke tradition, the one who chose family over institution. But now, according to various commentators, he appears increasingly distant from the structure he grew up in, and increasingly scrutinized in the life he chose.
It's impossible for me to take my family back to the UK safely.
You're obviously very deeply affected by this. What memories, experiences had you hoped your children, Archie and Lilibet, would have had that you think they won't be able to now with this?
That doesn't automatically mean isolation or crisis, but perception can be powerful. Sources quoted in various outlets describe Harry as under visible strain from nonstop headlines. Public pressure, especially when tied to family, can be deeply destabilizing. And when fatherhood has been presented as a central pillar of personal healing and identity, criticism touching that space can feel particularly sharp. Meghan, on the other hand, appears publicly composed and strategic. Legal teams reportedly continue to monitor coverage closely. That response aligns with how high-profile public figures often operate when reputational stakes are high. However, legal pressure and emotional reassurance are two different tools. One controls narrative risk, the other calms public doubt. And right now, doubt remains active. The contrast between the Sussexes' limited visibility with the wider royal family and the frequent public appearances of other senior royals has become part of the broader discussion. Whether that distance reflects personal boundaries, logistical realities, or deliberate strategy is unknown. But absence tends to invite interpretation. Meanwhile, the monarchy's silence feels calculated. Historically, the palace does not engage in rumor cycles. It rarely confirms or denies unless constitutional structure is directly involved. But in a digital era where silence often gets interpreted as meaning something, that traditional approach carries different consequences. Insiders quoted in media suggest King Charles has been advised to remain neutral publicly. Any overt gesture, supportive or critical, could be misread or amplified in unpredictable ways. When institutions move carefully, they move slowly. Behind closed doors, it would not be surprising if contingency discussions exist. That does not mean wrongdoing. It means institutions assess risk constantly. Titles, succession frameworks, public trust. These are long-term considerations in any monarchy. The more the online conversation intensifies, the more pressure builds around clarity. What's undeniable is this: the Sussex story has shifted from empowerment narrative to uncertainty narrative. The image of a clean break and fresh start now competes with questions about transparency and communication. In situations like this, there are only two long-term paths: address confusion directly and attempt to reset the narrative with clarity, or continue maintaining distance and allow speculation to eventually lose momentum, if it does. History shows that questions tied to royal structure rarely disappear quickly. They settle into archives. They become footnotes. They shape public memory. So now the spotlight turns to the audience. Is this simply a modern media cycle feeding on ambiguity? Or is this a communications miscalculation with long-term consequences? And most importantly, what should happen next? Drop your thoughts below. Like, share, and subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this. This story is still unfolding, and we'll be here when the next chapter begins.